is an amazing series. We can all agree on that. For some, it's an amazing comeback to their childhood in the 90s on the original black and white brick Game Boy. For others, it's a fun new adventure to explore each new region and discover each new Pokemon. Wait, why does this all sound so familiar? Have I done this before? Did I grab the wrong script? Hold on, let me read ahead. Okay, that's new. That's a point I didn't make before. That's definitely something I didn't agree with back then. Wow, I really just went there? Okay, so this is an entirely original script. But why am I revisiting a game I've talked about already? I've never done that before. But then again, that was my very first video, and it was absolute garbage. And my opinions of this game have shifted pretty drastically since back then. So I suppose a remake is in order. And what better time to do so than with the release of the new sequel, Legend ZA? This will be a great refresher for the original Camo story for anyone wanting to jump into that game. So Pokemon X and Pokemon Y, the 6th generation of Pokemon. These games were the series' big leap into full 3D after the DS entries were only 2.5D, with 3D environments but 2D character sprites. This was also the series' debut on the 3DS, a handheld that was actually already out by the time the previous games, Black 2 and White 2, were released on the DS. With this grand leap forward for the series, many changes were made to the series' formula to shake things up, many of which still persist to this day. However, alongside these changes, there also came many controversies. These games are often considered to be the start of the series' quote-unquote dark age, or at the very least, they're just generally seen as weaker than what came before. At the time I made my original video, I personally considered them to be the absolute low point of the series. Oh, how naive I was. I was still really new to Pokemon at the time. I'd only played like 4 or 5 of the games, and the series itself was only on Gen 7, long before the significantly worse controversies that came alongside Gen 8, and especially 9. I actually replayed Gen 6 somewhat recently. My original playthrough was of Y, so I tracked down a copy of X and played it all the way through again. I had a great time. So why was I so harsh on the game all the way back then? Well, only one way to find out. Let's take another look at Pokemon X and Pokemon Y to see just what they did to the series that made them be received with such mixed reviews compared to what came before. The first point of contention that most Pokemon fans have with XY is that it's far too easy. This was the generation to introduce the Universal EXP share. This was the gen where you're given 2 starters. This was the gen to introduce the concept of giving you EXP for catching Pokemon. This was the generation to introduce Mega Evolution and even gave you a free Mega Lucario, which is essentially a free win button for most battles of a playthrough. Here's the thing though, most of what I just listed off is entirely optional. I'm serious. You don't need to use the second starter, or even the first starter for that matter. The Universal EXP share is a toggle that you can opt out of. You can decline the Mega Lucario, and you don't even need to use Mega Evolution at all. Look, here's a picture of my team from my original Y playthrough. You'll notice that I have the Mega Lucario and the Mega Kanto starter. Now, here's a picture of my newer X playthrough. Notice the lack of the aforementioned Lucario and Kanto starter. Now, of course, on a first playthrough, you would be more likely to use the gift Pokemon. Why wouldn't you? On a blind first playthrough, you don't know what's up ahead, so you take all the help you can get, especially with such overpowered Pokemon. Then, of course, they turn out to absolutely destroy the level curve, and make you feel very underwhelmed by the lack of challenge. But that lack of difficulty is largely self-inflicted. Not entirely, of course. All the gym leaders have at least one Pokemon without a full moveset outside the Psychic gym leader, for some reason. The last gym leader only has 3 Pokemon, and the Elite Four only have 4 each. And absolutely nobody, outside of Lysander and Champion Diantha, used Mega Evolution, despite it being the generation's new core mechanic. This generation was genuinely underbaked, which is a trend that unfortunately persists to this day. I will admit, yes, They could have done more to make the game more difficult. That being said, in my X playthrough where I deliberately chose to ignore the Kanto starter and the Mega Lucario, and to have the XP share off at all times, it was genuinely challenging. Not impossible by any means, and certainly not the hardest time I've ever had in a Pokemon game, but it was a lot harder than people give it credit for. It's that experience that leads me to say that the difficulty is largely, but not entirely, self-inflicted. If you ask me, they should have bumped up the number of Pokemon in the last couple gyms, and especially the Elite Four. They also should have had the last few gyms in the Elite Four use Mega Evolution, because my gosh is it underwhelming how few NPCs actually use it, despite it being the core part of the story and the world building. That's one thing that Gen 7, 8, and 9 did genuinely better. The gym leaders actually showed off their region's battle gimmicks, making their world building feel much more coherent. Speaking of world building, let's talk about what is by far this game's biggest claim to fame, Mega Evolution. I've briefly mentioned it a couple times already, but now seems like a good time to go into detail about it. Mega Evolution is a gimmick that allows for certain fully evolved Pokemon to power up and become even stronger. This power-up gives these specific Pokemon entirely new designs and stats that are still reminiscent of the original Pokemon's designs, but emphasizing their most iconic traits to an extreme degree. Mega Lucario, Mega Gengar, Mega Aggron, Mega Absol, Mega Ampharos, Mega Houndoom, and, of course, my second favorite Pokemon, Blaziken. All these Mega Pokemon and more really breathe new life into the battle mechanics in this game. The impact Mega Evolution had on the franchise is undeniable. People loved it so much that Game Freak felt the need to capture lightning in a bottle over and over again, with each new passing generation adding new gimmicks to shake up the formula. None of them have come anywhere close to the popularity of Mega Evolution though, and I think Game Freak themselves have finally realized that, since the reveal of Legend ZA ended with a tease of the return of Mega Evolution, showing that they knew that that was what they needed to end it on to generate the most hype. Now, here's where I feel the need to get a bit pedantic. Yes, Mega Evolution was introduced in this game, and yes, everyone loved it. And yet, I personally think it was actually Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire where Mega Evolution reached its true potential that fans love it for. That game introduced a ton of new ones, some of which absolutely defined the gimmick in the eyes of many. The Hoenn starters, other than Blaziken who already had one, Beedrill, Pidgeot, Salamence, Gallade, Sharpedo, Camerupt, Steelix, and, oh yeah, Rayquaza! The absolute most broken Pokemon ever introduced that was usable by players. That was so broken, they made an entirely separate tier for competitive just to allow players to use it. Yeah, Mega Evolution truly peaked in ORAS, entirely because it introduced new ones. And since it introduced new ones, fans have been begging to this day for newer games to introduce more Megas. And hey, with the release of ZA, I think that's entirely possible. Side tangent, but I never understood why the Camo starters never received Megas. They were the starters of the game that introduced the mechanic, why wouldn't they? The Alola starters got Z moves, the Galar starters got Gigantamaxes, in the DLC, but they did get them. The Hisui starters got Hisuian forms, and I'm sure the Paldea starters would have gotten something if Terra Style had any alternate forms too. Starters are the literal tutorial Pokemon, why wouldn't they show off the gimmick the game is trying to push? ORAS gave Megas to its starters, so why couldn't this game? I know the Kanto starters got Megas, and they were introduced in this game specifically to show off the mechanic, but that just makes the Camo starters feel like they got shafted in their own game. Sorry, rant over. Let's move on to something else. Let's talk about my personal biggest gripe with the game, back when I first talked about it. Back then, I made the claim that this game had an absurd number of Gen 1 callbacks. And yes, there are more Gen 1 callbacks than usual in this game, but they're not as in-your-face as I made them out to be. Plus, I didn't give the reason for all the Gen 1 callbacks. So, let's see here. We've got Sandstone Forest being a 1-to-1 remake of Viridian Forest, which is only noticeable if you're looking for it. We've got a Snorlax blocking your path at one point, which also happened in Gen 2, but still in Kanto, so take that as you will. There's a reference to Blue, which you need to go out of your way to find. We've also got a kid who says he likes shorts, which is actually a running gag in the series, which I didn't realize at the time. The person who runs the Pokemon storage system calls out Bill by name despite that never happening in any of the other regions, but Bill is the one who invented it in the first place, so it's not entirely impossible. In the post-game, one of the Kanto legendary birds starts to be a wandering legendary. Okay, I don't have a justification for that one. And also in the post-game, you can battle and catch Mewtwo, complete with a remix of the Gen 1 Wild Battle theme. Okay, that one is by far the most on-the-nose of all the Gen 1 references, and I have zero in-universe justification for it. So, for the most part, the Gen 1 references aren't nearly as in-your-face as I thought. And most of them can be justified with just a bit of mental gymnastics. It is still significantly more frequent than most other regions, though. Why is that? Well, here's my hypothesis. It's because of Generation 5. Gen 5 was a soft reboot for the series, only allowing players to use brand new Pokemon and keeping references to past generations to an absolute minimum. Now, I wouldn't know because I wasn't a Pokemon fan at the time, but from what I've heard, Gen 5 was heavily criticized because of these decisions. What I'm assuming happened is, because of this backlash, Game Freak overcorrected themselves by shoving in as many Gen 1 references into this game as they possibly could, as if to say, what are you talking about? This is still Pokemon. See, look, here's a Snorlax blocking your path. Here's Viridian Forest again. Here's the Kanto starters, but better now. And here are the Kanto legendaries, etc., etc. Is the Gen 1 pandering annoying? Well, yes and no. It did unfortunately start a trend that continued into Gen 7 and debatably Gen 8, where there were still a ton of references to Kanto, as if Kanto were the capital of Pokemon World or something like that. They used the Gen 1 starters to show off the new gimmick in this game, then they turn around and use them again in Gen 8 to show off the gimmick in that game! Okay, that was specifically Charizard, since they cut Squirtle and Bulbasaur until the DLC, and gave Charizard the spotlight as the champion's ace because it was the favorite of the Kanto starters, which just feels weird considering they already gave Charizard a bigger spotlight than the other two in this game since they gave it 2 Mega Evolutions, also because it was the favorite of the Kanto starters. Yeah, Charizard is a mess. Another point of contention that people have with this game is what they did to the Pokemon themselves. Now, don't get me wrong, the models for the Pokemon in this game do look great. They're quite high poly for what the 3DS can handle, and they all look exactly like their 2D counterparts. The main issue some people have with these models is their severe lack of good animation. Of course, there are some that have great expressive animations, Greninja in a ninja pose, Hitmontop stepping side to side, Mr. Mime doing a mime act, Ludicolo constantly dancing, Toxicroak being in a battle-ready stance. There is some good stuff here. Unfortunately, the vast majority of Pokemon have incredibly underwhelming and almost non-existent animations. I know Pokemon just stayed still in previous generations because they were nothing more than sprites. They were still in super dynamic and interesting to look at poses. This is especially true of Gen 5, where every single Pokemon was given incredibly lively and expressive animations that made them feel more alive than ever before. Then Gen 6 rolls around, and most Pokemon do barely anything more than T-pose. Look at Wailord, that's practically a static model right there. The Kanto starters, they barely move at all aside from Charizard's flapping wings. Mareep, just the slightest hint of a back and forth sway, same for its evolution, still a bit less subtle. Blaziken, my second favorite Pokemon, barely anything. Luxray, only its tail has any major movement, it's barely even bending its limbs. Lucario is literally just standing there. Even the newer Pokemon, Delphox, Pyroar, Malamar, Tyrantrum, Amoris, and so many others, they just stand there. And don't even get me started on Typhlosion. Oh my gosh, what did they do to you, my boy? What happened to your fire?
Hey, it's exhausting to keep our flames lit.
What do you mean? You're literally on fire right now. So am I.
Yeah, and that's entirely because we're just edits of the official key art of Cyndaquil and Typhlosion, which show off the flames. If we were real, we'd have our flames extinguished more often than you think.
Hey, what have I told you about breaking the fourth wall? Also, why wouldn't we want our flames to be active during combat? During rest, I'd understand, but these models are mostly seen in battle. Why would we only flare up during attack animations? The fire is the best part of our species. The players want to see it, like in Heart Gold Soul Silver.
Okay, yeah, you got me there.
Also, no offense, but the model for Typhlosion specifically just looks weird, especially without the flames. Cyndaquil and Quilava look just fine with or without our flames in this game. What happened to you?
Yeah, I really don't have an answer for you. I don't understand how Pokemon Stadium 2 on the N64 was able to make us look better without our flames than this game did. We were done dirty in this game.
Well, at least you were served justice in Gen 9. That's one of very few good things I can say about that game. That model looks great, both with and without the flames, and they're actually ignited during battle. While we're on the subject of character designs, let's talk about the Pokemon introduced in X and Y. I love every single one of them. The base form starters are my second favorite base form starter trio behind only Johto, for obvious reasons. The Fletchling line, the first Route 1 bird to not be normal flying all the way through its life, instead becoming fire flying, love that. Litleo and Pyroar are really cool lion Pokemon. Skidoo and Go-Goat are first goat Pokemon, that's fun. The Honedge line being haunted swords that are ghost steel type, that is super creative. Inkay and Malamar, squids who aren't water types, that's interesting. Clauncher and Clawitzer, they're cool lobster Pokemon who are water types. Helioptile and Heliolisk are first normal electric types with phenomenal designs. Tyrant and Tyrantrum, it took 6 generations for us to get a T-Rex Pokemon. Hawlucha are first fighting and flying type, being a hawk that's also a luchador, complete with its own signature move that's a fighting type move that also deals flying type damage. Why did they go so hard on this one specific single stage Pokemon? Phantom, Trevenant, Pumpkaboo, and Gourgeist are all super fun ghost grass types. And the legendaries, Xerneas, the legendary of life, Yveltal, the legendary of death, and Zygarde, the balance of nature between the two. I'm amazed they managed to make such phenomenal designs based on the letters X, Y, and Z. And, of course, who could forget such phenomenal Pokemon like Jigglypuff, Clefairy, Togekiss, Azumarill, Gardevoir, and Whimsicott? These are such wonderful additions to the world of Pokemon. Wait, hold on. Something's not right here. These Pokemon weren't introduced in X and Y. They're all from previous generations. Why did I put that in script? Oh, I see. These Pokemon weren't new to Generation 6, but they were revamped in this generation with the introduction of the Fairy type. Ah yes, the Fairy type. Easily the biggest change to the series formula that was introduced in this generation, and still persists to this day. Fairy-type Pokemon are offensively strong against Dark, Dragon, and Fighting types, and they're weak to Fire, Poison, and Steel types. They're defensively strong against Bug, Dark, and Fighting types, and they're weak to only Poison and Steel types. Also, Dragon-type moves have no effect on them. This new type, with its super interesting matchups, really shook up the series in a way not seen since Generation 2, with the introduction of the Steel and the Dark type. In Gen 2, the Dark type was specifically designed to counter the Psychic type, which was the most overpowered type in Gen 1. In Gen 6, the Fairy type was specifically designed to counter the Dragon type, which was the most overpowered type in Gen 5. I'll admit, I do find it a bit weird that they introduced a new type so late into the series, especially since the dialogue makes it very clear that Fairy types are brand spanking new, and yet it's applied to a few already existing Pokemon. And if you really want to get pedantic about it again, the Fairy type also appears in games that take place earlier in the timeline that came out after this game, like Legends Arceus, Let's Go, Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, and, oh yeah, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which was the first game to retcon fairy types earlier into the timeline, and it came out the very next year, retconning a ton of this game's dialogue into nonsense. The same can also be said in Mega Evolution for that matter. This game treats it like it's a big brand new discovery, but then along comes Oros showing Megas being used well over a decade before this game takes place. Then Oros also had a ton of implications about the existence of a multiverse in the Pokemon timeline, saying that there's a universe where Megas exist and a universe where they don't. But then Gens 8 and 9 got rid of Megas in favor of the new gimmicks Dynamax and Terrastall, which raises the question of whether those gimmicks exist in the Mega timeline or not, and also the fact that Megas exist in Kalos, Hoenn, Alola, and Kanto, and they suddenly don't exist in Galar, Sinnoh, and Paldea, but fairy types do? Yeah, this game started a really weird trend of retcons that continues to this day that makes the Pokemon universe as a whole very difficult to discuss the lore of. Why can't I use my Mega Blaziken on my all-fire types team in the Galar region? I realize that's not this game's fault, rather it's the fault of Gen 8 for cutting Megas out of the equation entirely when they existed just fine in Gen 7 alongside Z-moves, but whatever. And hey, I may not be able to use Mega Blaziken in the Galar region, but at least I can use, Mega Blaziken thanks to Dynamax! Okay, so let's see here. I talked about the easy difficulty, Mega Evolution, the world building and retconning that this game started, the lackluster animations and the new Pokemon introduced in this game, the fairy type. I think that's everything. So thank you everyone for watching. I've been Camo64, and I really love this game now. You know, something doesn't feel quite right. I feel like I'm forgetting something important. Something about this game that was so terribly executed that made me absolutely hate it all those years ago. Something that was so bad about this game that I decided to make it one of the biggest running gags on this channel. What was it? Ah yes, my good old nemesis Team Flare. One of the most poorly written and executed evil teams in the entire series. Through all the ups and downs this game has, and how wildly my opinions have shifted through this entire ordeal, Team Flare is still the one thing that I have the exact same opinion of when compared to my original video. They may not be the worst evil team anymore, that dishonor now goes to Team Yell, and or Macrocosmos if you count them, but Team Flare is still an absolute atrocity of writing, even by Pokemon standards. Near the start of the adventure, you meet a man named Lysander, who's a famed inventor. You encounter him twice in quick succession, and he's all,
Blah blah, I will make the world beautiful. Blah blah, this world should become a better place. Blah blah, you are one of the chosen ones.
Gee, I wonder who the villain is! Look, I get it. Pokemon has never had the most in-depth stories or the most three-dimensional characters. I'm not expecting Shakespearean character depth in the slightest. In fact, Pokemon has done this very same tease the leader before encountering the team thing before. Both Cyrus, in Platinum specifically, and Ghetsis appear and give elaborate speeches about their motivations long before we ever battle their respective teams. There is absolutely nothing wrong with doing that, especially for kids games where the story isn't the priority. The problem with Lysander is that he just goes absolutely overboard with his villainous quote-unquote foreshadowing to a ridiculously comical degree. The other characters act like he's a friendly ally, paying zero attention to all the red flags he's throwing up in his dialogue.
Hey, it's nice to meet you.
This world is imperfect.
What?
If only I could wipe away the impurities.
Is anybody else listening to
and
this?
make it as beautiful as me.
Lysanderoth, you are behind all this?
Yes, it was I. My machinations lay undetected for years. For I'm a master of deception.
Like seriously! Even with Cyrus and Ghetsis, the other characters acknowledge how suspicious they act. Barry is all, what's with that guy? In response to Cyrus, and Charon is all, trainers and Pokemon help each other out, in response to Ghetsis and Ed. Literally nobody calls out Lysander for his weird dialogue. The most we get is the inconsequential side character Cena saying, "I wonder what kind of beautiful world Lysander desires." And that's it. Lysander is so blatantly obviously the villain that it is comical how the other characters aren't picking up on it. Later on in the story, you meet a bunch of people in absolutely ridiculous looking bright red suits. They're
The very fashionable team whose very name makes the people tremble in fear. Team Flare!
We first meet Team Flare in a cave where they're looking for fossils. This is potentially yet another Gen 1 callback, since that is an exact replica of how we first meet Team Rocket, in a cave searching for fossils. These guys are an absolute joke though. Their battles are some of the easiest grunt battles in the entire series, and their design is just so stupidly absurd that it's impossible to take them seriously. I know Pokemon villains are typically pretty over the top for the sake of entertainment value. This is a series meant for kids after all. But Team Flare just takes it up to an absurd degree. They have two major plans throughout the story. First, they take control of a power plant to reroute all of its output to their own ambitions. Then they invade a Pokeball factory. Because reasons. You stop them both times with such ease that I literally forgot those two story beats happened when I first talked about this game. Late in the game, it's revealed that, gasp, Lysander was the leader of Team Flare the whole time. Oh no, who could have guessed? He claims to have access to an ultimate weapon that will wipe out the whole world and leave only Team Flare behind. Wait, I'm sorry. What? Team Flare, the absolute stupidest, derpiest, and easiest evil team in the whole series. And they're the ones with the darkest plot in the series? I'm sorry, but that just doesn't add up. The whole game, they're presented as just another Team Rocket who exists solely for the game to have a villain. The whole game, they're set up as the oddball and the laughingstock of the entire Pokemon villain lineup. The whole game, you're meant to laugh at them for failing miserably. They're literally designed to look funny. I briefly mentioned the bright red outfits, but I mean, come on! How can you take them seriously? And they're the ones who want to commit genocide? Game Freak, what were you thinking? Team Flare was the last traditional evil team we ever got, and this jarring heel turn from comic relief Saturday morning cartoon villains to genocidal maniacs was some absolutely abysmal execution. You can't have an end-of-the-world plot without any proper build-up for the people trying to do the world ending. So let's talk about that whole end-of-the-world thing. Now, that's nothing new for evil teams. Teams Aqua and Magma wanted to overwrite the natural balance of the world's ecosystem. Team Galactic wanted to rewrite the universe in their image. Team Plasma wanted to destroy the societal relationship between people and Pokemon, as a ruse to take over the world. Neo Team Plasma resorted to flat-out terrorism to try to take over the world. All of these evil teams had ambitions with worldwide consequences. The difference between them and Team Flare is that they actually had build-up throughout their stories. Team Aqua and Magma stole valuable technology and experimented with volcanic energy before they found their way to the legendaries. Team Galactic had multiple bases spread all throughout the Sinnoh region. Team Plasma kept giving elaborate speeches to allure the masses to their side, while also having a dark side that we saw that they didn't show publicly. Neo Team Plasma started low and slowly built their threat level back up as the story went on. Are these the most in-depth and epic Shakespearean villains ever written? No, not in the slightest. But they still had a proper build-up and payoff. Team Flare's sudden swap from silly childish villains to genuine genocide was far too jarring of a transition for this game's story to be even on par with any of the evil teams that came before them. And, unfortunately, they were the last of the end-of-the-world villains we ever got out of Pokemon. Team Skull were just petty thieves who were posing as stereotypical gangs to try to seem intimidating. Team Yo were just a weird, toxic fanbase. and Team Star were just a bunch of kids who got picked on too much and lashed out against their fellow students, becoming the very thing they swore to destroy. Team Flare is a weird transitional middle ground between the previous end-of-the-world villains and the modern, down-to-earth troublemaker villains. The problem is, Game Freak tried too hard to make them both, but they ultimately ended up being neither. They were too big of a threat to be considered down-to-earth, but their genocidal end-of-the-world plot comes out of absolute nowhere, unless you count Lysander's constant ranting about how much he hates people. In the end, it feels like Game Freak didn't know what they wanted to do with Team Flare, and as such, didn't put the time or effort into making them make as much sense as the other evil teams. I missed the end-of-the-world villains, and they unfortunately went out on a flat note with Team Flare. So, with Team Flare out of the way, do I still think this is a good game? Yes. Yes, I do. This game is still a genuinely great time. It was the last game in the series to use the traditional style, grid-based level design, HMs for progression, 8 gyms, and an Elite Four. This game's presentation is phenomenal, with the bright and colorful art style it has, super sleek UI, the only time Game Freak made a perfect online UI, rest in peace 3DS Online connectivity, the phenomenal designs for the Kalos Pokemon, and overall, I think it's a genuinely fun experience. So, in conclusion, Pokemon X and Y are flawed Pokemon games, but they're still fun Pokemon games. If you have a craving for the traditional Pokemon formula, this game delivers that in spades. Sure, the story is comically bad, and all the characters are pathetically one-dimensional, but the new features that this game brings to the table, like Mega Evolution and the Fairy type, more than make up for it. I would absolutely recommend playing this game if you're new to Pokemon. Or, heck, if you've played it before but had issues with the easy difficulty, maybe consider replaying it, with the EXP share constantly off and not using the gift Pokemon. Like I said, I did exactly that on my recent replay, and it made the experience significantly more fun. Whether you're new or a veteran, this game has something for you.